If a horror film really works, you want to have sympathy for the main character. It's like a matter of record, the way that it's laid out, which is very sort of striking for a debut novel. Well, Stephen King likes the adaptation, so that's good enough for me.
Hello and welcome all to ScreenRant's Challenge My Goat. My name is Todd Gilchrist and I am your bookworm through this show of superlatives. Today's topic is the greatest Stephen King movie of all time. Our expert today is writer and director Edgar Wright, whose adaptation of Stephen King's Running Man was released in November and makes his debut on streaming and physical media on March 3rd. Humbly, Edgar says that it's not his movie, but another that is the greatest Stephen King movie of all time. Can you tell us your pick, Edgar?
Could you imagine if I came on here and said that my adaptation was the best of all time? Say, I don't want to be immodest, but I threw you off.
Tell us. No. I was just going to say, tell us your pick.
Well, there are obviously some extremely strong ones, and within the Stephen King film adaptation world, that there are at least two off the top of my head that some people consider the greatest films of all time. The Shining is often kind of mentioned as the greatest horror film of all time by many. And I don't know if it still is, but wasn't Shawshank Redemption for a long time was the highest vote? Was it still the highest voted IMDb film?
I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but it certainly is one. It's up there. Yeah.
I mean, and so, obviously through the years, there've been so many that I really enjoy. So it seems slightly kind of obtuse for me to say that the greatest Stephen King adaptation of all time and my favorite is actually the first one, which is Brian De Palma's Carrie, which is not only Stephen King's debut novel, or at least his first published novel, and first film adaptation as well. So I'm not suggesting that there aren't other great ones and they kind of peaked with the first, but it happens to be my favorite, and I just think it's a stunning adaptation and really just scores a bullseye on a number of levels. So that's how I feel about Carrie.
Well, you brought up, The Shining, which obviously, as a magnificent a film as it is also a film that Stephen King was like, I don't think this is a great adaptation of my work. And The Shawshank seems almost an anachronistic choice because it is not sort of in the wheelhouse of horror for which he is best known. So which tells me that there seems to be a dichotomy between a great movie made from a Stephen King movie and a great Stephen King adaptation. What makes Carrie a great adaptation as opposed to just being a great film, which it also is?
Well, it's interesting, actually, just to follow up on what you said about The Shining, I think both things can be true. I think that film is magnificent and hypnotic,
of course, and
worthy of endless rewatches. And yet I sort of agree with Stephen King's criticism of it as an adaptation. What he says about it that he doesn't like, I don't disagree with, having read the book, because the book makes Jack Torrance a more sympathetic character, or at least you know what he's going through, and you know that the evil in the hotel is gaslighting him. So you have more sympathy for Jack Torrance, in the book than you do in the film. And I think that was obviously because it's a very personal book for Stephen, as most of them are. I think that obviously is, he takes some offense at that, because I think he sees a lot of himself in Jack Torrance and kind of issues that he had at the time. So I can understand that. I think why Carrie, and also it's interesting, as you say about Shawshank, Stand By Me is the other one, which is several people's favorite movie, and many more. I love Misery. The late, very sadly departed Rob Reiner made two incredible Stephen King adaptations, both of which, Misery is more horror, but it's still in the thriller realm. And then Stand By Me is a coming-of-age film. I think what's amazing about Carrie is it manages to do all of these things, because it manages to be a great coming-of-age film and also just a, incendiary horror film why it really hits home for me is I think it's a genius premise, because in a horror film, you know, if a horror film really like works, you want to have sympathy for the main character. And the genius of Carrie is that you have total sympathy for Carrie White, played amazingly by Sissy Spacek. You understand and you see in like horrific detail, like what she's going through at school. And also the fact that because of her strict upbringing, she doesn't understand what's happening to her body. And, you know, she's becoming a woman and doesn't really have, you know, has not been brought up being able to cope with it. And obviously she has and P.S. she has telekinetic powers.
Sure.
I buried the lead.
That little detail.
But the thing that I think is genius about that film is, on one hand, you totally sympathize with her and you don't want anything bad to happen to her. Of course, terrible things happen to her. And so it's this amazing feeling where you have real sympathy for you. It's like, please don't let anything even more awful happen to Carrie White. And yet you also really, really want to see her wreak revenge. So it works both as a coming of age movie and a revenge movie in a spectacular fashion. And I think like the climax in the prom on a number of levels is so emotional and operatic. And I think it's sort of Brian De Palma at his best as well, because I think he's an incredible cinematic technician. And I think sometimes when he had, you know, his detractors sometimes accuse him of being like a stylist more than an emotional filmmaker. I don't think that's entirely true, but I think Carrie is one where you couldn't make that argument at all, because the performances are so great by everybody involved, and you're totally locked in with the emotional journey. And I've talked about this before, but I find the prom sequence so strong, because every time I watch it, there's the moment just before, you know, for people who haven't seen it. In fact, you know, if you haven't seen it, go watch it now. I'm not going to ruin this movie for you.
Yeah.
Go watch it now.
We're going to talk about it as if everybody who's...
It's only 95 minutes long, so it's a good watch. When just before the horrific prank gets pulled at the prom, where the school bullies, led by Nancy Allen, are going to tip an entire bucket of pig's blood onto Carrie White when she's crowned homecoming queen. Just before that, Tommy Ross, played by William Catt, who's her, you know, like prom king, her prom date rather, and then they get kind of like a. You have to forgive me. I'm from the UK, so my prom terminology is not at its best.
Sure,
we don't really have the prom in the UK. I sort of see the prom on things like in films like Carrie. So he has gone along with the ruse of taking her to the prom. He doesn't know exactly why. He's not part of the nasty part of the prank, but his girlfriend, played by Amy Irving, Sue Snell, has told him to take Carrie White to the prom. And he's aware that this is some kind of ruse. And at first he doesn't want to be part of it. And then he takes her. And then there's an amazing moment in that scene where it feels like they're truly falling for each other. And that the actual, because Carrie White also thinks that this is a prank, is like, why is Tommy Ross, you know, the kind of the school stud, like taking me to the prom? This must be a joke. And then she kind of agrees to go, and then they have a really tender moment where you really feel like the two characters are falling for each other. And
she gets really swept along in the moment and everything.
Yes, and it's so sweet and so genuine, which just makes the horrific anticipation of what's coming next so awful, because everybody understands the school experience. And one of the great things about Carrie is that everybody can relate to at least one of the characters. Maybe you were one of those people. You know, I always wondered what it would be if you were the school bully. Like, how would you react to watching that film? Would it kind of make you think about anything that you'd done like sort of when you were at school. But I think everybody can relate to characters in Carrie, and so I think that moment of tenderness and genuine euphoria of perhaps falling in love and this being a genuine connection is so key to the movie. And whenever I watch it, I have that feeling that maybe it'll work out this time, which is not something that kind of happens in every movie. I don't watch Halloween and think sort of maybe, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis is not going to run into Malcolm Myers, but I do have a feeling like in Carrie that like maybe this time it'll be okay. So the whole film feels very sort of profound to me. Obviously, you know, in a kind of like amazing, incredible climax full of gore and special effects and miniature work and split screens and that amazing Pino Donaggio score. I do think that it kind of really hits some incredible tender moments. And that's not just because I think it's a great adaptation. I think Brian De Palma is doing amazing work, but also, of course, the actors are just incredible. And it's funny that people always say in this day and age, they were saying about this year in the Oscars, there's the most nominations that horror movies have had, and people always point to, oh, you know, there's so many great performances in horror that never got nominated, like Toni Collette in Hereditary. People always bring that up, but we shouldn't forget that in 1977, Sissy Spacek and Piper Laurie were both Academy Award nominated for their work in Carrie, as well they should, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm curious if you described so effectively like sort of the way that this movie encapsulates sort of that you know teen movie or the sort of adolescent experience, and then also the horror and everything else. I'm curious, you know, you obviously had in front of you the previous adaptation of this, and I remember you saying when we spoke to you when the movie was coming out that you wanted this to be more of an adaptation of the book than a remake of that movie. Are there things that this movie did in terms of striking that balance, finding the right balance, that you feel like De Palma did in adapting it, that you were like, oh, if I can do this with this material that I have with The Running Man, I'll feel like I was successful?
I think it's a slightly different thing because I think the Carrie adaptation, you know, the book, I actually only read the book more recently. Like I loved the film and seen it multiple times, and then, you know, kind of read the original book, which is really interesting in terms of how it's written, in terms of letters, and it's like a matter of record, the way that it's laid out, which is very sort of striking for a debut novel. So I think they did a really good job with the adaptation. I think the thing that was different with my film is that the 1987 adaptation of The Running Man is radically different to the book. And I think, so it wasn't even, I didn't really equate it to kind of Carrie particularly. It was more the sense that this Richard Bachman novel, you know, that there's an entirely different movie to be made out of the material. You know, and so it's a thing that I think sort of even just on the press tour and stuff all the way through, people, you know, kind of having to sort of find myself stressing as like, well, I don't really see it as a remake. It's like just a different adaptation of the same source material, you know?
Brian De Palma did not feel in any way like obligated in that way where, you know, he took it and made it his own. You obviously had a more involved relationship with Stephen King in the adaptation of at least to get his endorsement. Did that impact at all sort of your creativity or your collaboration with him to make sure that you got it right? Because you obviously changed some things in this, including the ending of your adaptation from what's in the book.
Well, I mean, I will say, like, in terms of a collaboration with him, it was not just a joy as like one of my favorite authors and somebody that's been a hero of mine since I was, you know, 13 years old. I mean, really is about encouragement, because I think he now gets script approval on adaptations and some cast approval. And obviously, like, making something like in my adaptation, I wanted him to be happy. And I knew that he had reservations about the previous adaptation, not least because it's like bears little resemblance to the novel.
Such a departure.
Yeah. And I think sort of like he'll admit to being bemused by the previous one just because it's like, well, this is just a different story. But what was important actually is the ending is an interesting point there, because we do change the ending, and it's funny actually, sort of having had the film come out, I still get occasionally people saying to me, why did you change the ending from the book? And the blunt fact of it is the book ending is very, very reminiscent of the events of 9/11. And to put that in a movie in 2025, I personally thought would be in spectacularly poor taste. And Stephen King agreed with that. He actually, when he read the adaptation, he said, I was very curious as to how you were going to handle the ending. And, he said, I thought you and Michael did a great job. He said, I don't think that ending is something that, could be seen on screen now or needs to be seen. And also, I think he's probably he's a different person as well, because I think he's not like the angry person in their 20s that wrote the book. So that was important to us. This is before we started filming, obviously, that we had the endorsement of the adaptation, that he liked what we'd done. He liked what we'd done with it, and he liked what we'd done with the ending. And then that continued. Then really during the shoot, I hadn't really kind of was in contact with him at all. He was like, hey, I like these casting choices. He watched a few other Glenn films before, approving him. Like I told him to watch Hitman, which he did. And then during the shoot, like we just were cracking on with it. And I would occasionally send him photos, like of Tabby's Diner. There's like a diner in the sort of the main kind of location. And I sent him a photo of that. And he was like, oh, that's amazing. And I would just send him little kind of snippets. I think there was a shot of like the rioters at the end, and there's a lady with a Richard Lives kind of placard, and I sent him a photo of that. And then I didn't really, he saw the trailers, and then the first time I spoke to him on the phone, we'd only ever communicated by email up until that point, was after he just watched it. He watched the first. We did 2 test screenings, and he watched it after the first one. And I spoke to him on the phone. It was kind of wild. And he was, incredibly complimentary and really was jazzed about it. And then he watched it again when it was finished. And that's when I met him, actually. He was great. He was it's exactly what you would hope and want, is the encouragement and sort of approval of what we'd done. And so that kind of made me feel sort of good about it, in terms of, regardless of what anybody else thinks, is like, well, Stephen King likes the adaptation, so that's good enough for me,
Listen, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the greatest Stephen King adaptation. I think mine's probably The Shining, but if our readers, I know it's like I really came with an out of the box choice there. But if you disagree with Edgar's GOAT selection or mine, head over to ScreenRant.com to our Challenge My GOAT article series and let us know your pick in the comments below. If you make a compelling argument, we might read it on a future episode of our series.
Do I have to come back and arm wrestle them or something?
You do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody's going to come in here. They're going to talk.
Graveyard Shift is the best one. I challenge Edgar Wright to an arm wrestle.
Exactly. But thank you so much, Edgar, for your time, and thank you so much to our listeners for listening.
Thanks,
Have a great day.